Who's ready for part 2 of the SKFL preview, where we look at Kinney's team and then we take a peek at the once vaunted but now second best division, the Karl. Part 2, Megapod. Here we go, Casey. What do you got?
Ew. That's for the Karl guys. We're coming. We're coming back for the title.
All right. Well, yeah, Karl's coming. That could be the new. We should change the division names to names from the Wire too. You guys can be the Omar division because you really are spooky scary when you got Ian there with CMC.
Yeah.
So let's jump into the. We didn't talk much about Kinney's team. We want to throw a little shine on Kinney's team real quick.
Yeah. He's classic Kinney again. I mean, his team looks great if you're 2016. I mean, Odell, Julio, Antonio Brown, Gronk. I mean, those guys were great at the Jubilee. But no, it's, Cam Newton hurt him because, with Fields, I think you're looking for a kind of a high-end starter that you can play early on. So you lose Cam, and now, you got to start Andy Dalton week 1. I mean, that's going to hurt. You got Henry. Henry and Carson's all right. But yeah, no, I mean, his receivers, as much as I poke fun of those guys were good 4 or 5 years ago, they're still very, very intriguing. I mean, if Odell and Julio have anything left, they're going to be all right. And then Antonio Brown looked the part last year at times with Tampa. So we'll see now with a full offseason how him and Brady click. So yeah, I like the other 3 teams in the division a little bit more.
He just got his work cut out with him because his keepers were just
they
weren't difference makers. They were really good starters. I mean, you keep a guy that might not even start week 1 based on what he did in his wide receiver room in the draft. Like he built for depth. I mean, it's just he was going in really handicapped with what he could do. Now he got a lot better. I thought Antonio Brown was one of the steals of the draft. I mean, I remember kind of thinking he was going to go in like the 5th or the 6th and he ended up getting him kind of pretty late. But, Juju in the 4th, the same kind of thing over Judy, over Odell, and some other guys that went in the 6th and 7th, I thought was a reach. But, if he's confident in that, but he's going to need some things to happen. I think Ian covered it really well with Henry. Henry's just tough in the SKFL because because he doesn't catch. You need him to get to multiple touchdowns or those 180-yard games to really separate from some of those other Kamara, McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook type players.
The thing about Henry too is he finishes so strong because of how he runs. Like he's just in December, he's throwing up 40s and 50s like every year, but he always kind of starts out a little bit slower. And so Henry's a perfect guy that is on a playoff type of team because he'll just carry you through the postseason. But if you look at Henry's Septembers over the last couple years, it's not like he's one of the top running backs after the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season.
Yeah, and as we move to the Karl, I'll just give my first thoughts because obviously you two jokers are biased about this little division you got going over here. But to me, I see it 2 tiers. I think I got Ian and Jeff here, and I think I got maybe 3 tiers. I think Casey and Yusuf are on a different tier potentially. What do you got? How do you guys see it from kind of that inner perspective?
I'll jump. I mean, Jeffrey right now is by far the favorite, and like I said on the start of the last one, like this is the first time in 3-4 years where Ian isn't coming in as this overwhelming favorite. You've always been worried about his team, but I'll touch on him in a little bit. I didn't think he got much better during the draft at all. Where Jeffrey, don't forget Jeffrey.
You got him high on. You got him high. That's why he was toast after.
Yeah, we ruined Blake's draft with an edible last year. We ruined Ian's draft with an edible.
So Jeffrey, I mean, when you think about his team last year, he was the favorite all season long. He was the 1 seed, the best record. So if you just compare his team to last year that had success, all he did was get better. I mean, his running backs are the same. Yeah, he takes a hit because of Kittle, but he played without Kittle for 10 weeks. Kittle was hurt. So really, all he's got is Noah Fant versus Goddard, who he was playing with, which is essentially a wash. Ridley was his 1 last year, so that crosses over. Then his receivers last year were Juju and Hollywood Brown, and he changes that with Amari Cooper, which is way better than those 2 guys. And then, all those other guys like Pittman and Waddle can easily replace that third. And then where I think the big jump is his quarterbacks. I mean, last year he was Goff and Matt Ryan, and to get Stafford and Cousins out of that is definitely a little bit of an upgrade. And that's just not even touching on Watson. I mean, if Deshaun Watson plays this year and is a top 10 quarterback, then Jeffrey is instantly the favorite in the league. I think there's just no question about it, because his quarterbacks with Stafford and Watson would be, borderline up there with the Los, Blake, and Ian's. And then his running backs are just so much stronger. And he's got 2 top 12 receivers. So, yeah, it's Jeffrey looks really good. Your team's going to get better when you've got a lot of keepers late. And so, I mean, I think that's what helped Jeffrey. Amari Cooper was a guy that I just could not believe he kept falling. No joke. I mean, when I was going to pick at 2, I was between Cooper and Allen Robinson as like the best receiver after Hopkins and AJ Brown were on the board, off the board. So, I mean, I had Cooper, arguably as the 3rd or 4th best. Now I took Deontay over Cooper, but like, it was because I went in and said, Deontay, I'm taking in the 3rd round. Like, that guy was put in Sharpie. Like, I'm taking that guy in the 3rd round, regardless of who falls. I just wanted that guy on my team. But Cooper was higher on him than on my board. And so for Jeffrey to get him, in the 4th round, I felt like was massive, because he's a, low end receiver 1 that he's adding to Calvin Ridley.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm banking that those guys that I brought back, they always say you never want to draft your last year's team, or, don't draft 2021 based on 2020. But my thing, what's going to make or break my season is Eckler, Gibson being better than they were last year. Ridley being better than he was last year. And those might be tall tales. I mean, tall tasks. Ridley was a top 5 receiver. Eckler, Gibson, when they played, were top 10 running backs. But Eckler's shot up the board, where if you look at best balls and kind of redrafts, he's becoming like a top 5 running back. Like there's leagues where he goes over Saquon, he goes over Elliott. And in the SKFL, he has that ability. Same thing with Gibson. I mean, maybe if you buy everything that Rivera's saying and they've hid stuff, that's going to be a much better offense. If you look at Gibson's splits last year when they were ahead, he was amazing. He just played with such bad quarterbacks that he was off the field so much, and that's when he lost snaps to McKissick. But realistically, that team should be 10-7. They should be ahead with that defense. He should be getting a lot more work. So that's my path. And then, I Stafford was a guy I wasn't going to leave the draft without Stafford. So I maybe reached, if I would have known I could have got Garoppolo and Cousins in the 8th and the 11th, I probably wouldn't have taken Stafford where I did. But I was that way with Goff. I was that way with Karl. In my head, I think Stafford has an outside shot of throwing for 6,000 yards, being the MVP of the league. I just had to he was just a guy I wasn't going to not have in my draft. So if he is everything that I think he's going to be, then I think I'll be in good shape. But Ian, I think, still is the better team, but he just didn't get better. And the Lance thing, I like Lance. I mean, I'm a pseudo 49er fan, but I just don't know how Lance helps his team this year. Like, you're not playing him until week 5 at best. And
I don't think he plays.
I think it would be basically like using a 5th round pick on Taysom Hill. And, when you were a championship contender, it made sense. I just don't know. I don't know what you root for if you're Ian, or when you can make that trade. The trade deadline's week 8. So I just don't know if you're comfortable. I don't see a world where Lance starts before week 7.
Yeah, I don't think he makes the trade during this season. I think it's a next year trade during the offseason because, like you said, I don't think by the time you feel comfortable starting Lance, you're willing to give up Lamar or Mahomes. I mean, let's just call Mahomes untouchable. So basically what Lance is, it basically tells the league that Lamar's available. Now, if Lamar's available, I mean, you're talking about the biggest trade chip in SKFL history. We've never had a guy that is that kind of high ceiling number 1 overall player in his prime that everybody would want on their team, essentially available. But I just don't know how available he is. And if Ian's just going to ride with those 3 guys, I mean, a 50 on your bench every week only helps you in the power rankings on the SKFL. I mean, it's not going to help you anywhere else. So yeah, I get wanting him. It's that same thing. Like if you want to have that guy long term, if you think that guy is, the Mahomes upside over the next 5 years, get him. And I think long term that helps him. But for this year right now, without a trade, he's getting nothing out of that 5th pick that he had, and that was already losing his 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, that'll be the interesting kind of subplot is if Lance pops in. Let's say Garoppolo's just shitty, which is possible, or he gets hurt.
I just don't know if it's possible because their schedule's so bad early. I mean, what it would take would be Garoppolo. If Garoppolo was going to be shitty, he would have lost the job last year. He would have lost the job already.
He's lost the job in theory because they drafted a quarterback at number 3 and traded up to do it. So the job's technically not even his anymore.
But I mean, it's just like, let's
just say what I mean.
He could go to the Super Bowl with a healthy Garoppolo. Where it is going to be, Lance needs Garoppolo to get hurt.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. What if Jimmy G goes down week 1 and now Lance gets the job week 2? Do we really think Ian's going to trade Lamar in season?
I mean, possible. Do I think that if he's really good? No. But if let's say he's like, you look at his receivers, you're like,
yeah,
he could probably use an upgrade there. And maybe he does that. Or maybe he looks at his running backs and is like, I've got one guy and I've got, 5 guys that can't play.
And it's like, okay, Lamar Jackson. Yeah. I mean, he, 2 years ago was the number 1 player in the SKFL, but then you start thinking about, okay, what teams would be willing to give up an elite top 10 player? I mean, you're talking about, if you're going to trade Lamar, you need Ian's only trading Lamar for a top 5 running back or a top 5 receiver. I mean, we know that. Well, you throw out Los and Blake because they're already set at quarterback. I think Randy's the guy that could potentially do it, but if he's that high on Trevor Lawrence, it means he'd be walking away from Hurts. So, I mean, what does he do? Does he offer him DK? Does that get it done? I think Yusuf would be intriguing if he was, going to deal an AJ Brown or something like that. It's going to take a team that has a stud that falls out of it and, is sitting at 1-4 and they're willing to punt for next year. And then
Wade would make a lot of sense. Like if Wentz is just Wentz and going, then he has that ammunition with Hopkins, Allen Robinson to make that move. But there's a world where Lamar isn't a top 6. There's a world where Lance is better than Lamar for sure.
Definitely. He's banking on that.
Like, I mean, without Dobbins there, Gus Edwards, I don't know if that offense, I mean, until Brown really get going, I don't know if Lamar offers that elite upside that he did the past 2 seasons. I mean, and we've seen it I don't know. The Lamar thing is defenses are kind of – I don't see that world where Lamar's constantly going to be running for 75, 80 as much because they don't have to worry about the speed on the outside. It's more of the power with Gus Edwards. And until they get those receivers in the fold, I don't know. I don't like the Ravens this year. But again, I mean, Ian's got a really good team. It's just –
yeah, but see, like I'm anxious for the receiver because whose receivers are worse than Ian's? I mean, Ian's got the worst receiving group in the league.
I mean, on paper, nothing really pops there, of course. Lockett can have his moments. Gallup's a 3. Cobb, that's a throwaway. Maybe Robbie Anderson with Darnold, but probably not. I mean, you're right. It's not.
No, his receivers are brutal. I mean, I've looked, I would take all 11 teams receiving groups over them. And I mean, just stack it up against Rob's, because I think Rob's is on the lower end of the receiving tiers as well. But I mean, you take Higgins and Kupp over Lockett and Robbie Anderson in a heartbeat. And so that's Ian's weakness right now is receiver. Ian always has McCaffrey and then a no-name number 2. But Ian's always had 3 good receivers. I mean, remember Ian last year had DJ Moore, Deontay Johnson, and Julio. I mean, 3 top 15. And now all of a sudden he doesn't even have a top 15 receiver. I mean, I think that's where Ian is really falling down the map is his receivers. And like we said in the last pod, if you're going to try and get 240, 250, just getting these guys that are going to get you 17, 18 from your receivers, usually where you get to 250 is you have one receiver that can pop for 40, then the other guys get you your 20s. But if you've just got 3 receivers that are, combining for 60, 70 points, you've got a long way to get to 250. Now, I will say McCaffrey's that guy, it's been 2 years since we really saw McCaffrey, and you forget how freaking elite he is. I mean, he's really 2 players. So if McCaffrey goes back to that, that's always the X factor with Ian, because he's essentially playing with 12 starters versus 11. But yeah, no, I mean, I see a world where Ian takes a step back without making that trade. I mean, if he rides those 3 quarterbacks all season long, I don't think he's a top 16.
I got about maybe 12, 13 minutes left. So let's make sure we get Casey and Yusuf's stuff in here. But to your point, Casey, I think there's definitely the weakest, the most vulnerable he's been here in the last 3-4 years.
Definitely.
Which I am all for. Thumbs up.
Yeah, that's what you hoped out of the draft. I mean, you hoped AJ didn't run away with it, and you hoped Ian didn't get monumentally better. And I think both those things happen. I mean, I thought AJ had a really good draft making that trade, but I think Ian has some long-term play, but you didn't leave the draft thinking like, oh my God, how are we going to beat Ian? Which is the first time in 3 years. So that's a win for the Karl, and it's a win for the rest of the league.
So I'll pivot here quickly because I know Casey will talk about his team. But Jeff, when you look at Casey's team, kind of what does your breakdown look like?
I like Casey's team. I mean, I thought he did a really good job of getting his running backs. The reach for him was going Chase where he did. I mean, there were some receivers there because Casey's always sort of willing to kind of move up, and it would be curious to know. I mean, he said earlier on this that he was just locked into taking Deontay Johnson. I'd be curious to know. I think there could have been a world where he could have got, flip-flop, got one of those elite higher-end receivers that ended up going in the third. Like, he probably could have got Cooper Deontay Johnson or DJ Moore Deontay Johnson, and he ended up settling for Deontay and Chase. And I think that, but his team, like, you forget, because the Tyreek trade happened so kind of like willy-nilly, like, his team is amazing with Tyreek, and it hasn't even sunk into me that Tyreek's on his roster because, I mean, he's my brother. He's in the Karl. I constantly look at, what he was keeping, and never in a million years did I think he was going to get Tyreek. So for him to be able to come out of that draft with Tyreek and Deontay, like, that was some wide receivers have been his weakness the last few years. I mean, he's kept some of those guys, like going back a couple years. I think he took Gallup. He kept Gallup. He kept Devontae Parker. He kept some of those like wide receiver threes, and that's kind of what he did. But I kind of really liked what he did. It's going to come down to Darrell Henderson, I think, for him, depending on what happens. I don't think any of us are convinced that Mostert is going to be healthy, but he just needs Henderson to be 15, 20 carries and to be the touchdown guy. If Henderson loses out the job to Sermon or Michael Michelle, and then Sermon beats out Mostert, then that's where he could become vulnerable. But I thought he did a really good job of building his team up. And again, he's got those guys with Kyler, Tyreek, Aaron Jones. He's got 3 guys that he can throw up against anybody's 3 guys. He's got 3 guys that can score him a 150. And so then it's just piecemealing the other 8 starters trying to get 125 points, and he's got good enough depth to do that.
I'm waiting for ESPN to release the 30 for 30 on that Tyreek trade, by the way. I think it's coming next week or the week thereafter. So there needs to be an investigation on that. But when you look at your team, and Tampa Bay officially won, Boston lost. When you look at your team, Casey, kind of how do you break it down?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of said this with a couple other teams, but I'm just kind of like looking at last year's roster, and a lot of it's, in a keeper league, your roster is always going to look similar. I was a Final Four team, made the playoffs. My quarterbacks are the same. Baker got hot the second half of the season. So, if Baker can be what he was in the second half of the season, then I like my quarterbacks. But, a couple 50s there, a couple high 30. Like, I like that out of Baker if we can get that Baker. Kyler Murray had the opposite, where he started out, as I think in week 9, he was the number 1 overall player in the league. Seahawks hit him pretty hard, and he hurt his shoulder. He finished, but that's where all of a sudden his fall off kind of happened, was that week 9 game, and never really came back. But I like my quarterbacks. And then my running backs, I mean, last year were Jones, Mostert, and Elaire. And this year I've got Jones, Mostert, and Javonte Williams. I'm actually looking at Darrell Henderson as just the 12th round flyer. If he keeps that job, even better. But I'm looking at Javonte just needing to take over that Bronco backfield before the Mostert thing, if it happens. And then I'll be fine with my backs. And then my receivers, like Jeffrey said, I mean, last year coming out of week 1, I was Will Fuller, T.Y. Hilton, Devontae Parker. So to go Tyreek, Deontay, and Chase, I mean, that's three guys way better than I've had. My tight end last year was Ertz, who I ended up dropping after 3-4 weeks. So I'm not really any worse at tight end. So I think I got just better. I mean, every position group from last year, I got better at. So I'll take that. Chase was intriguing because I know it's at 4. I think I was between Chase and Judy. And then, I mean, to think that Judy basically went like 18 picks later was crazy. I would have liked to have seen where Chase went. The Deontay thing was funny because I would have taken Cooper at 3, thinking I could have then moved Deontay to 4, but Jeffrey had traded with Kinney, where Kinney was picking right after my 3 spot. And if anybody I thought was going to take Deontay, it was going to be Kinney or maybe even Ian. And then Ian even had that 4 that I thought maybe he would take him. So I just wanted to keep Deontay away from Ian and Kinney more than anything. But yeah, no, Chase, I'm fine with Chase. Chase was a guy that back when I did my first kind of, big board in May, was a top 12 receiver. He was one of those guys that I just wanted to have. I mean, he's, with Calvin Johnson, Jefferson, like I could see that kind of impact coming out. Now, he hasn't looked good at all in the preseason. So we're going to see, if all of a sudden he has a couple drops in week 1, now you start to worry about Jamar Chase. But the same, in the same breath where I said I was going to take Cooper or Allen Robinson at 2, there was a world where I took Jamar Chase at 2. If people were going receiver heavy, I knew I needed a receiver with that pick so bad that I wasn't putting it past me going Jamar Chase basically at like number 8 overall, which shows kind of how high I was on him.
Yeah,
you're going to be fine with Jamar Chase, I think.
Yeah, how much of a steal the flip in a 2 that the pick that would have been Jamar Chase basically netted you Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, I mean the Tyreek Hill thing, like we'll go into it. I mean, we were talking all week. We talked pre-keepers. I mean, Tyreek Hill was available, and we were talking the week of the draft. But until it's official, you don't know it's official. I mean, I felt like it was official based on what I knew he wanted to do. I was very curious to see what Randy's plan was at back-to-back. In my head, I'm thinking, he might just go Cooper Robinson himself and just say, okay, I'm going to replace Tyreek Hill with Cooper Robinson. And I thought that was, and then also Chenault. And I'm like, well, now you got your 3 receivers for Tyreek Hill. That makes sense. But I think he sees Trevor Lawrence as an Andrew Luck. And if you get Andrew Luck and his number 1 weapon, which could be Chenault, I mean, there's a world where Trevor Lawrence probably scores more than Tyreek Hill this year. I mean, when you just look at overall points by the position. So, the trade ultimately was Tyreek Hill for Trevor Lawrence and Chenault. So he just went all in on the Jags to give up one of the top 2 receivers in the league.
Yeah, I think we talked on it. The actual pick was Lawrence, but it was the Sanders pick. Then the trade got announced and everybody was reeling that Randy wasn't at the draft. Then he comes with Sanders, and everybody's like, okay, he's just phoning the draft in. Like, this doesn't make any sense. Then he announces that he's trading Tyreek Hill, and it was just like, what the hell's going on here? That's classic Rob Morrow tic-tac-toe, where you clearly don't. Now, he saved the pick by justifying, okay, now I'm going all in on the Jags. But it was more of the order of what happened, of not showing up to the draft, not being in communication, drafting Miles Sanders, trading Tyreek Hill. Then it's like, okay, well, how do we save this now? We save it by picking Trevor Lawrence and then having Lawrence be elite. But I think, everybody viewed both of those picks as a stretch. But yeah, he had been shopping Tyreek Hill and clearly wasn't locked in. But when you use a 1 to keep that guy, I mean, it doesn't really become just Trevor Lawrence and Shenault for Tyreek Hill. It actually becomes his 1 Tyreek Hill for Trevor Lawrence and Shenault, because he used a 1 to keep that guy, whereas you kept Shenault as a 17. Like, he could have easily traded Tyreek Hill for Shenault and picked up a pick and opened up his 1. So I think it's a little naive to just be like, the pick was actually Tyreek. The trade was actually Tyreek. It was a 1, a 2 for Trevor Lawrence and Shenault.
Well, the 2 would have been A.J. Brown if he didn't keep Tyreek. So he wouldn't have had the 2 in that sense. And then you're not trading Tyreek anymore. You're trading the 1 pick as the potential. So there's a lot. It's not the 3 players, because he would have used that other keeper on a player that would have cost
which would have been better than drafting Miles Sanders. So he could have had A.J. Brown, opened up his 1, which could have been
Trevor Lawrence. It would have been Trevor Lawrence, because he doesn't have a 2 or a 3. So if you're locked into Trevor Lawrence, that's the move you have to make.
All right. Well, I've got to be continued.
Trevor Lawrence, and where he took Miles Sanders, he didn't have to trade the best receiver in the league to draft a guy where he could have drafted him. But
this is its own pod in case he's 5-0 and Tyreek's tearing up the league. We'll have a bitch session pod about Tyreek Hill. Well, I got a little time crunch here, so I want to move on to talk about Yusuf's team next.
Yeah,
Yusuf got burned with the J.K. Dobbins news, and I mean, I think kudos to him to kind of be able to like try and fix his team on the fly. I kept saying there was a time in the draft where Yusuf, it was like round 10, and Yusuf only had 5 players on his roster. He kept trading down, which you usually don't really want to do in a fantasy draft, because most of the talent happens in the first 5 rounds. But he was able to get some steals late. He made some genius trades. He was at the bottom of 4, moved up and got Woods, which I thought was great value. He got Cortland Sutton really late, which I thought I had Sutton like a 5th or a 6th round grade on him. He got him in the 9th. And
I don't think he had a pick between 4 and 9, because Woods was his 4. And then who would he have drafted before Sutton? Maybe Zach Wilson? Maybe Zach Wilson was an 8.
Yeah.
So I don't think Yusuf had a 5, 6, or 7, which when you lose Dobbins, that hurts.
Yeah. Yeah, but he's got really, I mean, he used the waiver, the one waiver to his benefit. I mean, with the Justice Hills news today, like Tyson looks like a really good play. His season will be kind of like determined based on, is Saquon an elite back early? Because he essentially, losing Dobbins and then flipping Elliott, and he basically traded Elliott and Clyde Hilaire, right, or Elliott and whatever he wanted to do at the top of 3 for Mixon and A.J. Brown. So that'll be curious. And so, yeah, if Saquon comes back and is who Saquon is, then that drop off of what Elliott could be, doesn't hurt you as much. But I think we'd all rather have Elliott over Mixon.
And I think that might be where he messed up, because I don't think he realized the receivers that were going to be there at 3. I think he looked at A.J. Brown like, I need to get a stud receiver. I mean, Yusuf's always had an Odell or he's always had one of those kind of big name receivers. And I don't think he realized that he could still get that guy at 3, where, I mean, we saw it. I mean, you could get an Amari Cooper. You could get a Woods or Lockett or DJ Moore. And I mean, he could have actually think his team would have looked a little bit better. I remember at the time thinking Yusuf won that trade, but I think in hindsight now I flipped it to where I think AJ has won that trade, because I think if you look at it as the Lair pick, Yusuf won the trade. But if you used it as you're taking a receiver at top of 3, then I think Yusuf would have been better off standing pat with Barkley and Elliott.
Yeah, I think he got really good receiver. I mean, I like his receivers, which helps. He's hurting on tight end, and he's hurting on a little bit of receiver depth. I mean, he's going to probably have to go 3 running. I mean, I like AJ Brown, I like Sutton, I like Woods, but that 4th one is a little suspect. And then, yeah, tight end, he's got his work cut out for him there. But I like the Wilson pick. I mean, he feels really confident in Tannehill. Bridgewater ends up being like a really good pick late. So now he can kind of wait and see on Wilson. Take the home run threat. You don't have to worry about starting Wilson probably the first couple weeks of the season, and you get to see how he does. Bridgewater's a little bit safer, but knowing if you would have told anybody you lose, I mean, that happened to me one year where I drafted Luck. It happened one year post-draft when I drafted Bridgewater the year he blew out his leg. It's hard when that happens in the middle of the draft. You're left scrambling. You figure, okay, I don't even have to worry about running back, because he had Elliott, Dobbins, and Saquon, and then makes that trade, and it's okay, yeah, I can afford to move Elliott because I'm so high. And if you talk to Yusuf was really high on Dobbins. It wasn't just like Dobbins was Dobbins. He was expecting Dobbins to almost be as good as Saquon or Elliott. So that's, I think, why he really felt like, okay, well, I got Saquon and Dobbins. I can easily move Elliott. Yeah. I don't see much of a drop-off between Elliott and Mixon, and it gets me A.J. Brown. So it's not just the casual owner losing Dobbins. It's a guy that was like really, really high on Dobbins. Losing him really hurt him. But I thought he was able to, recover and do pretty well to come back. I do think, yeah, in another division, like, he's really good. It's just hard in the Karl, because he starts out, running through the Karl gauntlet, and like, you can start out 1-3 or 1-2 or 0-3 and not feel great about your team, where he has the talent to recover.
Yeah, I think the Karl's strong again. Tannehill is going to be Tannehill. He's going to do his thing. And Teddy's super reliable to get you 25 to 35 each week. Doesn't throw a lot of hand grenades at you, but he's never going to throw 50 at you either.
Which is kind of how Yusuf won his title. I mean, that's kind of how Yusuf won his titles in the past. Just get a quarterback that doesn't, shit the bed. Just get a guy that can score 25 to 35.
Pull up week 1 matchups really quick, Rob. You're coming down to Twin Peaks Thursday?
Yeah.
Don't share screen. I just want to run through. I'm going to do my initial, just quick pick all 6 games. Who I got?
What?
I think pull up the week 1 schedule just so I can see team by team.
Oh yeah, gotcha. Let's go quick though. I got to roll.
I got it. I'm not even going to. I'm going to just pick the team. I think Los AJ play week 1. I think that's my game of the week. Just because you've heard how high I am on AJ's team. I'm on Los's team. So I think that one's really big, but I still think I probably got AJ as the winner. Then in the Pinella, Rob, Cappers. I mean, it's funny the way it's set up. I feel like the top 2 teams in each division are playing each other in terms of my ranking. So me against Jeffrey, Blake against Wade, and Los against AJ. I think I'll go AJ, Blake, Jeffrey, just because I've had them as the favorites in each division. Then you've got the bottom 2 in each division playing against each other. So it's intriguing for me to see, because I think it's really that Ian Yusuf. I think Ian, with as weak as Ian is, I think he would have been freaked out against me or Jeffrey week 1, where I think he gets a little bit of a break against a banged up Yusuf team. And then I think Musa gets to walk into a 1-0 game just in his matchup against Kinney. And then Rob, I think, is the better team against Randy too. So SKFL, it's a long season, but you definitely want to be 1-0 over 0-1. It gives you a little bit of a cushion.
For sure. All right. Well, hopefully we'll get these up soon, and we'll see everybody at Twin Peaks on Thursday night. What, 5:30 kickoff?
Yeah, I know Jeffrey works probably, so he can't get down there to 6. We're gonna try and pick
early.
You are? Sweet. Okay, cool. Braden might have karate, so I got to figure out what time I can get there. But it ends at 5:30, and then I just come straight there. But we just want to get that outdoor table again, because I know that's the setup where we'll feel safe. But I know Ian's in for sure. And AJ sounded like he was in when I talked to him yesterday. We were watching that Notre Dame game last night together. And then we just got to work on Los and the Sadies. Anybody else who wants to come, but I know Los and the Sadies are at least local.
All right, guys. Well,
all right,
we'll
Rob.
talk to you soon.
Go Mariners.
All right, bye.